Welcome back to Movies Outpost. Today we'll be diving into the action thriller world of both Equalizer 1 and Equalizer 2. Enjoy the recap. Our film kicks off by showcasing our lead character, Robert McCall. Robert is a remarkably organized individual who meticulously times his every action with a stopwatch, focusing on precision and efficiency. Currently, he's enjoying a quiet life, having retired from his intense careers with the Marines and the CIA. Robert instead works his part-time job at Mart, a place where he's well regarded by his colleagues who are unaware of his past. At lunch break, Robert sits with Ralphie. Ralphie, who's trying to become a security guard, receives help from Mr. McCall to manage his nutrition and physical exercise to achieve the necessary weight. Robert then hears a crunch, and his supposed tuna sandwich has hidden potato chips inside. Mr. McCall advises him to focus on gradual progress rather than immediate perfection. Robert, troubled by insomnia, spends many nights at a local diner. There, he sips tea and engrosses himself in books. He set himself the challenge of reading 100 books and is presently enjoying The Old Man and the Sea. Every night, he encounters a young girl who also frequents the diner. Their exchanges might be brief, but over time they are gradually getting to know one another. Fast forward to the next day, and we find Mr. McCall going about his usual routine at work. A bunch of his colleagues swing by, admitting they've been making bets about his previous profession. Robert, with a twinkle in his eye, claims he was a pip, likening himself to the backup singers for Gladys Knight, and even busts a move to prove it. His workmates don't buy it, expecting something quite different. Nightfall brings Mr. McCall back to the diner, where the same girl joins him shortly after. She spots him with a fresh book and inquires about the finale of the previous one. Robert speaks about the book when their conversation is cut short by the arrival of a limo across the street from the diner. The girl receives a call from Slavi. Despite her reluctance, she heads outside to jump into a limo. The following evening, Robert again spots the girl at the diner. She joins him at his table, introducing herself as Alina. When Robert asks about the bruise on her face, she shrugs it off, claiming it was just a result of some silly mishap. She has dreams of becoming a singer and gives Mr. McCall a CD with some of her own music. Robert tells her she can become anything she wants. Alina notices a wedding ring on Robert's finger, but instead learns about his late wife. Later, when Robert walks her home, they are stopped by Slavi. Slavi strikes Alina for reportedly disrespecting a client. Robert doesn't move, and Slavi, who dismisses Alina as worthless, hands Robert a business card. Time ticks by, and Alina is noticeably absent from the diner. Eventually, the diner's manager spills the beans. Alina's in the ICU, severely beaten. Deeply concerned, Mr. McCall heads to the hospital, where he spots Mandy, a friend of Alina's. When Mr. McCall finally approaches, Mandy recoils in fear, questioning his identity. After establishing that he's simply a friend, Mandy reveals her entrapment in the same grim line of work as Alina. She confides that Alina was beaten by Slavi after she retaliated against one of his hits, and so she was made as an example. Later that night, Mr. McCall studies the business card given by Slavi and the CD gifted by Alina. He reckons that if he doesn't step in, Alina's life could be snuffed out. But there's a promise he made to his late wife, to never revert to his violent past. This choice gnaws at him, tearing him apart inside. But in the end, he resolves that action is necessary. As the night deepens, Robert tails Slavi to an apartment above a restaurant, the chosen meeting spot for Slavi and his cronies. Robert waltzes in, playing the cordial guest, and presents an envelope stuffed with $9,800. At first, they scoff at Robert, but Slavi eventually warms up to the offer, nearly 10 grand for Alina's freedom. Just as they shake on it, Slavi throws a curveball. The cash would only buy Alina a month's worth of freedom. Enraged, he rejects the deal and orders Robert to get lost. Robert then begins aligning the glass skulls on the desk, pointing them towards each man in the room. He strides to the door, but instead of exiting, he locks it and swings around. After scrutinizing each man, he starts the timer on his watch and heads for Slavi. The henchman nearest to the door pulls a gun, but Robert disarms him, breaking his arm and firing a shot into Slavi. He proceeds to wipe out the other 3 men, brutally wounding them multiple times and absolutely removing them from existence. Tevi lunges at him with a broken bottle, but Robert counters with a corkscrew from the counter, finishing him as well. Robert then stops his watch timer, pleased with his efficient work. He saunters over to Slavi, settling down next to him as life slowly fades away. Robert chillingly predicts Slavi's imminent end, contrasting it with Alina's continued existence. After the violent showdown, Robert heads home to freshen up, apologizing to his departed wife as he slips his wedding ring back on. In the aftermath of the murders, a Russian mobster named Teddy descends upon Boston, tasked with uncovering the killer. He joins forces with a cluster of corrupt cops to gather leads. He directs them to grab surveillance footage from all cameras within a 6-block radius and instructs them to take him to his lodgings. His high-handed demeanor ruffles the cops, but Teddy shoots back, stating he's here to handle the job they couldn't. The next morning, one of the crooked cops, Frank Masters, escorts Teddy to the office of John Looney, a local Irish mobster, continuing his investigation. John pleads ignorance about the murders, expressing his hatred for Russians, dubbing them insane and presumptuous. In response, Teddy dismisses John, claiming he lacks the intelligence to orchestrate such killings. He unveils his real motive for the visit, denouncing the Irish for pilfering from the Russians and warning that such behavior will no longer be tolerated. As the hostility escalates, Frank discreetly readies himself for a potential showdown. John, fuming at Teddy's threats, is met with a sudden barrage from Teddy. Frank shoots the two other men in the room, and Teddy doesn't let up, pummeling John over and over until he's lifeless. With the room now quiet, Teddy turns to Frank, declaring his arrival with this brutal message. Teddy receives a call from the top dog, Pushkin. Teddy suggests that an outsider, not one of their usual rivals, committed the murders, commending the skill it would have required. Pushkin dismisses his speculations, demanding Teddy resolve the situation publicly to deter further incidents. Scanning still shots from security cameras, Teddy spots Robert entering the building. Meanwhile, Robert realizes Ralphie hasn't clocked in for his regular shift at work. When he queries the schedule manager, he learns Ralphie quit without a hint of a reason. Later, Robert visits a restaurant Ralphie's mother owns. Ralphie reveals he's taking a hiatus to help his mom spruce up the building following an electrical fire the previous night. Deemed accidental, Robert lends a hand in the cleanup. When they're done, he can't shake off his suspicion about the fire's cause, prodding Ralphie for the truth about what went down. Ralphie claims uncertainty, but it's clear to them both the fire was no accident. When night falls, two crooked cops, Ramar and Peterson, are spotted dining at Ralphie's mom's restaurant. They pressure her to wrap up business early and start squeezing her for protection money. They threaten another accident if she doesn't keep up with payments. Robert encounters them outside the restaurant and tells them he wants to report a crime. The officers dismiss him, beginning to drive off until one receives a personal call from Robert. He shows them a video he captured of their shakedown of a convenience store clerk, including their confession to sparking the restaurant fire. Robert can't help but laugh as he reveals that the recording is the only one he has. The officers threaten him, but Robert quickly disarms the pair and gives them a beating. He instructs them to return the extorted money or they'll be on headline news. Cornered, the corrupt cops have no option but to comply and later reimburse Ralphie's mother. In a different part of the city, Teddy pays a visit to Mandy, confronting her about the untruths she spouted during their earlier conversation. On his arrival in Boston, Teddy had inquired if Mandy knew anything about Alina, to which she claimed they weren't close. But he's recently uncovered that they are indeed good friends and demands to know when Mandy last spoke to Alina. Mandy admits that she visited Alina in the hospital a week ago and mentions the presence of a black man who seemed concerned about Alina. Satisfied with her honesty, Teddy thanks her, then abruptly puts her in a chokehold and squeezes until there's no movement. That same afternoon, Robert is spotted playing baseball with his coworkers. Ralphie appears, proudly sporting his new security guard uniform, having passed the requisite test. His peers are proud, and he tips his hat to Robert in acknowledgement. The next day at work, a criminal invades the home Mart store, brandishing a gun at the cashier, Jenny, and demanding the money from the register. Robert approaches, unperturbed, and starts emptying the till, willing to let the event slide. However, when the robber demands Jenny's ring, a keepsake from her mother, she refuses to part with it. Robert takes in various details about the man, such as his tattoos and baseball cap, but when a family with children walks into the store, Robert chooses not to intervene, instead handing over the ring and tracking the man to his car to note his license plate number. The police inform them of a recent string of robberies connected to the same man. Robert reassures Ralphie, asserting that no amount of money is worth a life. A moment later, Robert retrieves a sledgehammer from the utility tools section. The following day, Jenny finds her ring back in the register while Robert returns the wiped clean hammer to its place on the rack. As night approaches, Teddy visits McCall's home under the guise of a detective probing into the deaths of 5 Russians. He shows Robert a picture of Mandy's deceased body, passing off her death as an unfortunate accident. For the remainder of the day, Robert purchases various items for travel and fabricates a false prescription for meclizine, a medication commonly used to alleviate motion sickness during flights. Later, Teddy gets his crew to trail Robert to the diner with intentions of capturing and killing him. However, Robert is aware of their presence and singles out the line worker who enters the diner as an undercover henchman for Teddy. He points out the man's unusually soft hands for someone supposedly working on power lines. Simultaneously, a truck pulls up in front of the diner, obscuring Teddy and Frank's view. The undercover man brandishes an Uzi and instructs Robert to head out to the car. Unflustered, Robert activates his stopwatch and studies the man, swiftly using his book to disarm the thug and kill him on the table. He then plunges the diner into darkness and walks out, covertly snapping photos of Teddy and his men in their car. Teddy orders his men to bring Robert in alive, and they begin pursuit. Robert deliberately leaves a trail of bloody handprints on a wall to mislead Teddy and manages to isolate one of the corrupt cops. After incapacitating the officer, Robert escapes with his phone. At home, Robert attends to a gunshot wound by boiling honey and applying it to the injury. Anticipating Teddy and his men, he manages to leave his apartment unnoticed, deliberately leaving the bathroom sink running. From the vantage point of another building, Robert observes Teddy's crew via hidden cameras planted in his apartment. Upon entering Robert's apartment, Teddy's men discover receipts for a flight to Mexico and an empty prescription bottle, suggesting Robert's intended escape. However, Teddy dismisses this evidence as a deliberate misdirection, asserting that Robert is watching them even at that moment. Meanwhile, Robert pays a visit to his old friends, Brian and Susan Plummer, both of whom were former colleagues at the agency he used to work for. He approaches Susan, confident in her ability to gather essential information about Teddy and his employers. While Susan ventures off to the agency to identify Teddy, Brian expresses his relief at seeing Robert alive. It is disclosed that Robert had faked his death years prior, a truth Susan had always suspected, deeming Robert too smart to fall victim to a simple car bombing. Returning home via helicopter, Susan imparts her findings to Robert. The men Robert eliminated were part of the Russian mafia led by Vladimir Pushkin. Teddy, whose real name is revealed to be Nikolai, is a fixer who is called upon whenever Pushkin needs a problem resolved. It also emerges that the corrupt cops, Ramar and Peterson, were on Pushkin's payroll, but they were recently found dead. Susan concludes her report by issuing a warning to Robert. These men will stop at nothing until he and everyone he cares about are dead. Returning to the city the next day, Robert tracks down Frank and cunningly lures him outside by setting off his car alarm. Frank, paranoid yet determined to shut off the alarm, proceeds to his garage, unaware that Robert is lying in wait for him. He traps him in his car, which is rigged with a hose to funnel carbon monoxide inside, effectively creating a makeshift gas chamber. Desperate for information on Pushkin, Robert pressures Frank, who, after enduring the toxic environment for a while, agrees to cooperate. Guided by Frank, Robert is led to a warehouse where the Russians store their stash. There, he confronts the man in charge, coercing him to make his men surrender. He then proceeds to lock everyone in the warehouse's meat freezer, effectively securing the men and the money within. Next, Robert forces Frank into alerting the police, who, upon arrival, apprehend Frank and discover the frozen mobsters and money. Robert then makes his way to Frank's safety deposit box, which includes a USB stick containing information about Pushkin's operations. In another part of the city, Teddy is holding a meeting with a Russian mercenary to discuss the assassination of Robert. When the man at the table leaves to use the bathroom, McCall walks in moments later carrying the man's bloody, broken sunglasses. He confronts Teddy, presenting him with an ultimatum: call Pushkin and instruct him to close his operations or continue the pursuit and die. Teddy instead refers to Robert as a piece of lint, a mere nuisance to be cast away. Undeterred, Robert begins to recount a tale about a 12-year-old Russian orphan neglected throughout his life. In the story, the child is adopted by a caring man who gives him a home and family to call his own. However, a week later, the parents are found murdered in their bed. Drawing his story to a close, McCall implies that Teddy was the boy, suggesting that he killed his foster parents out of fear of being abandoned once again. Laughing off McCall's theory, Teddy claims he's not sentimental, arguing that such traits are weaknesses. McCall leaves a note with his phone number for Teddy, advising him to call once he's decided on the offer. As the night rolls on, Mr. McCall puts Frank's USB to use, transferring millions of dollars from Pushkin's operations to the FBI. He discovers a list of Pushkin's oil tankers on the drive and plants bombs inside the ships docked at the pier, effectively destroying them. In his growing desperation, Teddy opts for a different approach to draw out McCall. Along with a team of mercenaries, he descends on Mart, taking McCall's co-workers hostage. He sets an ultimatum: McCall has 30 minutes to show himself or his friends will be killed. Teddy attempts to track Robert's cell phone, only to realize that he had left it on a bus, using it as a distraction to infiltrate the store. Unexpectedly, a song by Gladys Knight and the Pips begins playing over the store's intercom. Ralphie is singled out by the mercenaries to lead them to the security room, but they walk right into a trap set by Robert, who takes them out stealthily. Ralphie, visibly shaken, is instructed by Robert to guide everyone to safety while he deals with the intruders. With Teddy's men now inside the building, the lights suddenly go out and the doors slam shut, trapping them all inside. Robert starts improvising, turning items around the store into traps. He uses barbed wire and a heavy bag of gravel to create makeshift gallows. A second mercenary finds his comrade hanging from it, but before he can react, McCall strikes, using a gardening tool to finish him off. In a moment of confrontation, Teddy manages to shoot Robert in the shoulder. However, he makes a quick escape, using a torch and doorknob to cauterize his wound. Two more of Teddy's henchmen stumble upon the scene. They notice a torch placed on top of a puddle of gasoline with a wire attached. Suspecting a trap, they decide to ignore it and proceed. Robert then takes out the first man, only to patiently wait for the second to approach. He then takes him out as well. Ralphie comes to aid Mr. McCall, but is shot in the leg for his efforts. In a quick assessment of the situation, Robert instructs Ralphie to rush to the breaker box and turn the power back on in precisely 40 seconds. As Ralphie dashes off to fulfill his mission, Robert lures another henchman into a lounge room. He leaves a trail of blood leading into the room. As Ralphie switches the power back on, the henchman finds himself in a room with multiple cans of compressed oxygen inside a microwave. A sudden power surge causes the microwave to turn on, leading to a massive explosion that eliminates the assailant. Racing against time, Teddy makes his way to Ralphie with murderous intent, but Robert interjects, brandishing a nail gun. He unloads nails into Teddy's pressure points, immobilizing him completely. Overwhelmed and desperate, Teddy questions Robert's identity, but Robert just looks at him, and Teddy is met with a final shot to end him. 3 days later, Robert travels to Moscow, Russia, to find Pushkin. He catches the mob boss off guard during a shower. Flickering the bathroom lights on and off, Robert confronts Pushkin, saying he's here for the head of the snake. Pushkin tries to bribe his way out, but Robert is already gone from the room. As Pushkin reaches for his weapon beside the overflowing sink, he steps onto cut and exposed wires left behind by Robert. His final screams echo throughout the mansion as he is electrocuted and dies. Leaving Pushkin's estate, Robert passes the lifeless bodies of the guards and heads home. Upon his return, he is met by Alina, who is on her road to recovery. She informs him that she has found a proper job and has taken up reading. She also mentions an envelope containing $9,800 that she found among her items at the hospital. She thanks Robert for the changes in her life, implying she knows he's the one who set her free. Months later, Robert places an online ad, branding himself as the Equalizer. He offers his assistance to those in need who could use his unique skill set. He receives a coded email asking for help, to which he simply replies with a yes. The second movie opens with a scenic train ride to Istanbul. In one of the compartments, a man disguised as a local Muslim, complete with a long beard and cap, seems engrossed in a book. But his attention is elsewhere, focused on a family of 3, a father, a mother, and a young daughter. This Muslim man is none other than Robert McCall, undercover and watching carefully. As the father rises to head to the dining car, McCall follows suit, striking up a conversation with him. When asked about his reason for visiting Turkey, McCall reveals he's seeking a Turkish man who married an American woman, had a daughter with her, and then abused and forced the daughter back to Turkey. With this, it's clear that McCall is talking about him. The man slowly gets up, leaving the dining car while signaling to his entourage to handle Robert. Little do they know that they're about to pick a fight with a highly skilled vigilante. Robert swiftly neutralizes his attackers with great ease, leaving them all incapacitated on the train floor. Once he has dispatched the goons, Robert calmly returns to the Turkish man. As he adjusts his sleeves, he offers the man a choice: endure the usual level of pain or suffer something far more excruciating. The scene transitions from the tension-filled train to the bustling city streets, where we see Robert driving a sleek black car, working as a Lyft driver. He pulls up outside a building to pick up Sam, an elderly man embroiled in a complex case to find his long-lost sister. As a driver, Robert is often engaged in conversations with his passengers, observing some while chatting with others. His life now appears mundane, yet far from ordinary. Grace, the mother of the young girl Robert rescued on the train, enters the office of her attorney. In there, she's greeted with a sight she has been longing for: her daughter, safe and unharmed. The mother and daughter fall into each other's arms, overwhelmed with relief and tears. All of this was made possible by Robert's intervention, and their gratitude towards him is immeasurable. Yet, Robert remains on the road, unassuming and quietly observant, ready for the next passenger and the next mission that life might throw at him. The scene abruptly shifts to a home in Brussels. A man named Calbert walks in, casually removing his coat, expecting a normal evening at home. However, the sight that greets him in his dining room is anything but ordinary. His wife, face marred with bruises and blood, is seated at the dining table, crying. Before Calbert can comprehend the situation, a man coldly shoots his wife right before his eyes. The men then force Calbert to hold a gun and face it to himself. A moment later, a gunshot rings out. The narrative abruptly switches back to Robert, unfazed, continuing his job as a Lyft driver. He pulls up to collect his next fare, a man assisting a visibly distressed woman into the cab. She appears to be in severe pain, but Robert remains silent. Later, Robert arrives at the man's apartment, informing him that he'd taken the woman to the hospital, where they'd discovered multiple injuries on her. He advises them to do the right thing and attend to her, but the man attempts to attack him. With swift precision, Robert uses the man's card to slash him, subsequently breaking his and his buddy's bones in a swift, brutal showdown that lasts no more than 30 seconds. It becomes clear that Robert is not an ordinary man. His combat skills and ruthless efficiency show him to be extraordinarily dangerous, a skill he learned from his previous life. When Robert returns home, he's pleasantly surprised to find his old friend Susan waiting for him. They reconnect over dinner, during which Susan reveals that she's working on a high-profile murder case involving a couple in Brussels. Her partner on the case is a man named Dave. In the midst of their conversation, Susan gently reminds Robert that it's his late wife's birthday, a fact he'd forgotten. Concerned for his well-being, she suggests he make an effort to socialize more and possibly find a new companion. The following day, Robert discovers that Fatima's garden and wall have been vandalized. As he begins cleaning up the mess, a young man named Miles Whitaker approaches, suggesting that it's the landlord's job, not Robert's. After some negotiation, Miles agrees to repaint the vandalized wall for $350. Elsewhere, Susan engages in an online chat with Dave. They discuss the Brussels murder case and the puzzling fact that the victims were actually their fellow agents. In a bid to distract himself, Robert spends some time with Sam, a Lyft passenger who confides in him about being separated from his sister during the World Wars when he was just 9 years old. A treasured photograph confirms her identity. It's the same face immortalized in a portrait. Meanwhile, Susan and Dave arrive in Brussels to investigate the scene. As there is no evidence pointing towards a homicide, the case has been officially classified as the husband losing his mind and taking both their lives. Susan is visibly disturbed by the blood spattered on family photos. After thoroughly examining the crime scene, they depart. Susan and Dave head back to their hotel, discussing the mysterious circumstances surrounding the deaths of their colleagues. In the elevator, Susan bids Dave goodbye, reminding him to pick up some chocolate before they leave the country. As Susan enters her hotel room, she is ambushed by two men. Despite her valiant attempts to fend them off and managing to injure one, they overpower her, pinning her in the bedroom. Meanwhile, back home, Robert is spending time with Miles, imparting life advice. His peaceful moment is interrupted by a phone call from Brian, Susan's husband. His smile fades instantly, replaced by anger. Without a word, he abruptly ends his conversation with Miles and walks away. He immediately travels to Washington, D.C., to attend Susan's funeral, offering his condolences to Brian. He promises to bring the perpetrators to justice. Brian informs Robert that Susan never carried jewelry, implying her attack was not a random act of violence. Intrigued by this information, Robert decides to investigate Susan's murder himself. Using his skills, he decrypts Susan's phone to identify who she was communicating with before her death. He also hacks into the hotel's security system, gaining access to the surveillance footage. Studying the crime scene photos and replaying the elevator footage repeatedly, he senses that something is off, sparking his intuition to unravel the mystery surrounding Susan's death. In another part of town, the two assailants who killed Susan are indulging in some leisure time. However, their revelry is short-lived as a cell phone rings. Upon answering the call, a bomb detonates, decimating their apartment. The orchestrator turns out to be one of the three men responsible for the cold-blooded murder in Belgium. Simultaneously, Robert reunites with his former partner, Dave. Dave is visibly shocked to see Robert alive, revealing that he had attended what he believed to be Robert's funeral. He expresses disappointment that Robert, despite their 6-year-long partnership, hadn't told him he was alive. Robert, ignoring Dave's reproach, informs him about his suspicion that Susan's murder was a premeditated act, pointing out the peculiar fact that she hadn't pressed her elevator button. Seeking answers, Robert delves into Susan's last case, suspecting it could provide insights into her murder. He mentally reconstructs the crime scene, visualizing himself present at the site. His sharp, analytical mind starts piecing together potential scenarios, attempting to unravel the sequence of events that led to Susan's demise. He contacts Dave and goes over the facts of Susan's murder and the Belgian couple's murder. Robert spots a common thread: both the crimes were perpetrated by a left-handed individual. This connection leads Robert to believe that the same person is responsible for both the acts, and that there is a bigger, more complex picture to consider. As he ends the call, we see his apartment as a testament to his tireless pursuit of the truth, papers and technology dedicated to investigating Susan's murder strewn all around. He then looks outside to see the wall half done and Miles nowhere to be found. He grabs his gun and leaves. He enters Hood territory and immediately knocks out the guard and takes his pistol. Upstairs, he quickly takes out 2 men, and then we see Miles hanging out with a gang. They give him a gun and tell him don't come back until the clip is empty. Robert shows them a proper gangster's behavior, and with dual-wield guns he tells Miles to go. Downstairs, Miles goes off at him, but Robert tells him if he's so eager to be a gangster, let's jumpstart his career, putting a gun to his own head as Miles holds it. He buckles. Then Robert takes the gun back and gives him a mad lecture that his boys are merely just boys, nothing more. He tells him to decide his choice and leaves. He returns home until he hears a knock. He opens to find Miles there, telling him that he finished painting the wall. They talk for a bit until Miles says he can repaint his house wall, but Robert tells him he'll agree to it if he reads a book he hands him. Robert returns to his day job as a Lyft driver, picking up a seemingly ordinary passenger. The man is heading to the airport to catch a flight overseas to visit his daughter. However, as the journey progresses, Robert becomes suspicious of the passenger's odd behavior. His instincts prove right when the man suddenly brandishes a knife and lunges at Robert. Robert violently swerves the car, throwing the attacker off balance and stopping his attempts to stab him. Amidst the chaos, Robert manages to break his arm, forcing the man to pull a gun out. Robert is quicker, disarming him and ultimately killing him. To eliminate any evidence linking him to the passenger's death, Robert retrieves the man's phone and sets his car on fire with the remains inside the car. The following morning, Robert heads to Dave's house. Inside, he's introduced to Dave's wife and their 2 young girls. As the family heads off to start their day, Robert seizes the opportunity to share the unsettling events from his previous day with Dave. Robert sets the assassin's mobile phone he'd obtained and places it onto the table. He dials a certain number, and to their surprise, Dave's own cell starts to ring, unveiling him as the orchestrator behind the string of murders. Dave ends up confessing to his crimes. He rationalizes his actions by claiming he had turned into a mercenary after feeling betrayed by the government. The murder of Susan was a necessary evil, he argues, as she would have eventually unraveled his involvement in the Belgium murders. Following the revelation, Dave escorts Robert outdoors, introducing him to Resnick, Ari, and Kovac, the trio performing the killings under Dave's directive. In a bitter twist of irony, these are the very men whom Robert had trained while they were all in the CIA. Robert tells them that their mistake was killing Susan, and now each one of them will taste death. He promises that he will have his revenge for what they did to her, and then he tells Dave's wife that Dave said she can drop him off at the station. He adopts a playful gun hand gesture, picking up Dave's daughter in his arms, which makes him burn inside. One afternoon, Dave and his 3 companions set off for Brian's residence with an intention to eliminate him. However, their plan is thwarted as they find the house empty. Anticipating their move, Robert had previously escorted Brian to a safe house. Riled by this failed mission, the men reroutes to Robert's home. Miles is currently engrossed in painting the interior. Sensing danger, Miles instantly reaches out to Robert. Swiftly, Robert accesses his surveillance camera feed, directing Miles to conceal himself in a secret compartment. Miles, from behind a 2-way mirror, watches Dave, his fear escalating rapidly. Dave grows suspicious of the mirror and is just about to shoot at it when his phone rings. Robert, on the other line, claims to be at a location that is known to both of them. Believing that they've been led away, a relieved Miles emerges from his hiding spot. However, his sense of safety is short-lived as he finds himself cornered and held at gunpoint by Dave's men. The narrative transitions to Robert heading to a small town where he once used to live with his wife. This town is undergoing an evacuation due to an impending storm and hurricane. Despite the danger, Dave and his associates arrive and gain forceful entry into the town, eliminating an officer in the process. They infiltrate Robert's former home, scrutinizing every inch of the property for any sign of him, yet finding none. Their search of the neighboring area, which also proves futile. Opting for a bird's-eye view, Dave stations himself on a tower to supervise his 3 colleagues as they diverge to locate Robert. Robert, however, possesses a wealth of experience and skill that surpasses that of his adversaries combined. He has cunningly laid traps which his pursuers unknowingly stumble upon. Kovac, who enters a shop believing he's spotted Robert, is swiftly killed by a harpoon going right through him. Ari, who attempts to follow suit, is intercepted by Robert, who executes a swift and lethal series of slashes across his body. Lastly, Resnick, who chases Robert into another store, is eliminated by an explosive trap. From his vantage point atop the tower, Dave, peering through a sniper rifle, manages to connect with Robert over a call. He reveals that he has Miles captive, locked in a car trunk, and threatens to execute him if Robert refuses to surrender. Despite Dave's warning shots, Robert remains elusive. Just as Dave targets the car holding Miles, Robert counters by shooting the car's tire, causing Dave's shot to miss. In a frantic search for Robert, Dave is caught off guard to find him already atop the tower, initiating a face-off. Dave lunges to stab Robert, but Robert's speed outmatches him, causing him to miss. Amid the violent backdrop of the looming hurricane, Robert retaliates by gouging out Dave's eye, grabbing his knife to impale him, and then finally slicing him from behind, killing him. Robert concludes by hurling Dave off the tower, where he meets his end against the jagged rocks below and is subsequently swept away by the violent ocean waves. Robert swiftly moves to locate Miles, finding the young man trembling in agony from a gunshot wound to his leg. Robert transports the wounded Miles to his old home for first aid. Amidst tending to Miles, Robert finds himself gazing at a framed picture of his deceased wife, Vivian. As the film nears its conclusion, we observe Miles on a bus en route to art school. Fatima, Robert's neighbor, discovers the mural on the wall that uncannily mirrors a scene from her homeland. An inscription on the opposing wall reads, "I leave you with the best of myself." The narrative unfolds to reveal Sam being reunited with his sister Magda. Robert had intervened, leveraging some strings to bring them back together. In a final scene, we see Robert in his old house standing contemplatively as he gazes out towards the serene sea, marking the end of the tumultuous journey. The end. Thanks for watching. I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers and your support is greatly appreciated. Until the next one.